Hey folks, today we're diving into the ultimate weather showdown, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration versus the Farmers Almanac. That's right, it's the battle of the forecasts to see who's got the goods on British Columbia's winter 2024-2025. In one corner, we have the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, armed with satellites, supercomputers, and a team of top-notch meteorologists. And in the other corner, the Farmers Almanac, a centuries-old tradition using secret formulas, lunar cycles, and even a bit of weather folklore.
I'm Matt Safino, Chief Meteorologist at KGW-TV, and the Farmers Almanac forecast is out for the upcoming winter, not to be confused with the old Farmers Almanac forecast. Why do we need two Farmers Almanacs? I'm not exactly sure. Maybe the old one is for older farmers. Maybe the new one is for like Gen Y, Gen Z, millennial farmers. Not exactly sure what that is. This one, though, I got to tell you, I used to pore over this as a kid. Before I knew a mesocyclone from a millibar, or any other bar for that matter, I used to dig into this and be like, okay, there's going to be a snowstorm between January 11th and the 14th. And yes, and we're going to get out of school, and it hardly ever happened. Anyway, that's not the one we're looking at. We're looking at the forecast from the Farmers Almanac for this upcoming winter, 2024-2025. So here's what that looks like, according to the Farmers Almanac, not the old, but the new Farmers Almanac. And this is done by a forecaster named Caleb Weatherby. That's a pseudonym, not his real name. His name has been changed to protect the innocence of his forecast, or the sanctity of their forecast process, or something like that. Pseudonym. It's not a bad idea, you know? Like, when I get my forecast wrong, I'd be like, no, it's not my forecast. That was like Mark McWeatherbuzz's forecast. No idea where that forecast came from. What's this guy using to forecast anyway, like tide tables? Okay, seriously though, back to their forecast here. Saying it's going to be chilly and wet in the northwest. Newsflash, most of our winters are. Average temperatures and precip down in the southwest, near normal to below normal precipitation down in Texas, the deep south mild and wet, and then a mix of mild wet, cold and wet from the Midwest up into the Northeast. Which is interesting because this looks a lot like the La Nina forecast. We are going into a La Nina year, and just to remind you what that is, it's a change in the ocean temperature pattern across the equatorial Pacific. And when we get a buildup of very cold water here, pushes the warm water farther on off to the west, that in turn changes the position of the jet stream across the Pacific Ocean and downstream across North America, and usually, on average, ends up in a pattern that looks like this. Cool and wet in the northwest, lots of snow in the upper Midwest, but warm and dry in the deep south from Texas down into the deep south, and then a mix in the northeast and the upper Midwest because you can get snowstorms, ice storms, and a lot of variability there. So that's the typical La Nina forecast, and this is the Farmers Almanac forecast, and I don't know, I think they look pretty similar here. Near to below normal precipitation across Texas and the deep south, or at least part of it. Chilly and wet here in the northwest. Lots of mountain snow, lots of snow in the upper Midwest. Again, to flip back to the typical La Nina pattern and now to the Farmers Almanac pattern, I think they look pretty similar. Of course, again, we don't know exactly what they use to forecast this because it's secret and proprietary. They don't tell us other than the fact that they use a little La Nina. I think they use a lot of La Nina. And they use some lunar cycles maybe and some solar cycles. Now, there have been studies done about how accurate these Farmer Almanac forecasts are. And I got a coin here, so let's just flip that. 50-50 is how that worked out. That was done by the University of Illinois, 52% to be fair and accurate on the Farmers Almanac forecast. So wherever you live across our great nation, hopefully you're seeing the kind of weather that you want to have during the upcoming winter.
We're diving into a little weather detective work by comparing past data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and Farmers Almanac predictions to the real snowfall outcomes right here in Revelstoke, British Columbia. By stacking up these forecasts against what actually happened in this snowy paradise, we can see who gets it right. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration with its scientific models, or the Farmers Almanac with its time-tested methods. Let's kick things off with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's take and dive into how different climate patterns, like El Niño, La Niña, and neutral events, impact the snowfall here in Revelstoke, affectionately known as Pow Town. We've got El Niño seasons marked by blue bars, La Niña winters in orange, and those neutral seasons shown in green. Now, If you're into the nitty-gritty details, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration sometimes breaks these down even further, rating them as strong, mild, or weak. If you'd love to see a deeper dive into these distinctions, drop a comment below, and maybe we'll whip up a more in-depth video. But for now, let's hit some quick highlights. Take the 1984-85 season, a strong La Niña event that brought massive snowfall to Revelstoke, and 1986-87, a big El Niño event, also bringing heavy snow. And then there's the 1996-97 season, a natural event with its own impressive snow totals. The key takeaway here? Looking at over 37 years of data, La Niña and neutral seasons in Revelstoke rarely disappoint when it comes to snowfall. So, for all you powder hounds out there, those are the years to keep an eye on. When it comes to the Farmers Almanac, things got a bit tricky during my research. It wasn't easy to dig up past predictions that perfectly lined up with Revelstoke's actual snowfall data. I'm sure with a deeper dive, I could have uncovered more, but for now, I focused on a sample of the last 10 years of predictions versus the actual snowfall amounts. Here's what I found. Years that were predicted to have below average snowfall are shown in blue, above average years in orange, and average years in green. With Revelstoke's average snowfall hovering around 450 centimeters, the data suggests that the Farmers Almanac is hitting the mark about 40% of the time. So, while it's not a perfect track record, it's interesting to see how these long-range forecasts stack up against the real deal. To wrap things up with the data I've pulled together comparing the Farmers Almanac and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration forecasts against the actual precipitation levels here in Revelstoke, British Columbia, here's my final take. Having lived in Pow Town for over 20 years, I can tell you that the 2023-2024 season was one of the worst I've seen for snow conditions, definitely in the bottom two of my career. But if there's one thing I've noticed from both experience and the data, it's that a poor season like that is often followed by a much better one. And for those curious about what the old Farmers Almanac has to say for 2024-2025, they're predicting cold and dry. But seriously, who needs that kind of buzzkill? I'm betting on a classic Revelstoke rebound this winter. Call it gut instinct. Call it local wisdom. Either way, powder days are on the way.